My name is Bill Moore. I'm acting as the moderator. I've already shared with you some of my electric vehicle stories. I've been covering the world of electric vehicles now for almost 25 years, and it's taken me a lot of interesting places around the world. But now, and I can't tell you how excited I am that it's actually happening in Nebraska finally. One quick story. I always used to ask the car makers back in the late 90s, early 2000s, when can I get one of your electric cars to test drive? Well, where do you live? Omaha? No, sorry, we don't deliver cars for testing in Omaha. So I got, on a rare occasion, I got electric cars. But now we see electric cars, particularly around Omaha. I see a lot of electric cars now, and that is exciting. But of course, that raises the question, how do we charge them? And we're going to talk about some of that today, particularly with the focus on the new mandate, the federal program to install public chargers every 50 miles along America's major thoroughfares. And to do that, we are honored to have with us Randy Smith. Randy is going to present well, up there. I'll let you read it. I'm not, as you are aware probably, I'm not a skilled moderator. I didn't copy their bios. So we're going to let them introduce themselves. So all yours, sir.
So I am Randy Smith with the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy. I started there 5.5 years ago, which coincidentally was about the time the Volkswagen scandal hit the news, and with Volkswagen diesel vehicles having emissions testing circumvention software, they got caught. So it was a huge court settlement negotiated by Department of Justice and EPA, which provided states with funds to do projects to reduce emissions from diesel vehicles, which bled over into the world of electric vehicle charging. So as part of that settlement, there was a settlement agreement which laid out a menu of actions that states could take to reduce diesel emissions. States were allocated funds from the trust, prorated based on the number of the offending diesel vehicles they had in their states. So Nebraska's initial allocation was about $12.25 million. Settlement occurred in late 2017, so the trust was set up about the end of 2017. So it's been in effect now over 5 years. There's been investment income over the years, so we're ending up with about $12.5 million altogether. The funds became available to us as a state in 2018. And as I mentioned, the settlement mandated, or at least provided a menu of actions the states could take to reduce diesel emissions. So there are a number of categories that involved replacing older, more polluting diesel vehicles with newer, less polluting vehicles that could be new diesel or natural gas powered or electric. There were about 10 options altogether, one of which was to use Volkswagen funds in tandem with EPA grant funds that come to states to run their own clean diesel programs. But the agreement also allowed states to use up to 15% of their allocation for public electric vehicle charging. So the pie chart here shows kind of where we're at now with our spending. You can see most of the pie involves diesel vehicles like school buses, transit bus projects in Lincoln and Omaha. DERA is the acronym for the Clean Diesel Program with funding from Congress every year. We've used those funds to replace diesel refuse trucks, some school buses to replace diesel irrigation engines with electric equipment. But the red piece is our EV charging piece, a little over $1.8 million. We're somewhere between 14 and 50% of the total funds we ended up with. So our planning for an EV charging program began in late 2018. By that time, a number of other states had already released plans for an EV charging program that we had a chance to study. For say, Virginia just went out and looked for one contractor to build them a highway charging network. Other states designated highway locations where they wanted a charging station with these characteristics, and then went looking for somebody to build those. We chose to sort of open it up, not quite a free-for-all, but we didn't put too many specifications on the program. We had extensive discussions with our public utilities, particularly LES, NPPD, and OPPD, to learn about what were the requirements on the utility side to enable a DC fast charging station to operate. And that was very educational. In March of 2019, we partnered with NPPD to hold a statewide conference, an EV charging conference in New York, where we invited the public. We had representatives from several of the charging network companies, folks from around the state. We put out some ideas, what we thought we might do, wanted to get input from the utilities and the audience on those ideas. So over that summer then, we put together a program and opened applications in early August and then through middle of November of 2019. All right. So basically this is a simple outline of the program. We were providing partial funding for new public EV charging stations. These were reimbursements. It was a rebate program. Applications were open to both public and private entities. And here's the list of costs that we considered eligible for reimbursement. Most of the costs associated with setting up a charging station, including prepaying the network operation costs for up to 5 years, and also prepaying warranty maintenance costs for up to 5 years. We established some 3 basic categories of charging stations. We were looking for stations along highway corridors to facilitate long distance travel. Those had to have a DC fast charger along with a level 2 charger. Level 2 was necessary because at that point in 2019, there were still lots of older EVs like the Nissan Leaf and others that have no capability to use a DC fast charger. So we're going to make sure that all the existing EVs were served. Those sites had to be within 3 miles of a state or federal highway. Second category were community or tourist destination sites, which we gave the option either to put in a DC plus level 2 or just a level 2. If you're going to Scottsbluff National Monument, let's say, you're probably going to be there for a few hours, so you don't necessarily need a DC fast charger to get a significant bump up in your battery charge. And the final category was workplace charging, which would be level 2 only. Now, most of you are familiar about Nebraska, smaller cities and towns. It's not hard in most of the smaller cities to find a location within 3 miles of a highway. So in reality, a lot of our applications fulfilled both of those first two categories. And at the bottom of the slide are the reimbursement levels. For the DC fast charging stations, we funded up to 80% of the cost based on the lowest set of bids. We did require multiple bids and quotes for equipment and services and installation and all that. That 80% was the maximum that the trust agreement allowed us to apply for a private party. We could have done higher levels for government entities, but we decided to make the playing field level and set it for 80% for everybody. For level 2 only stations, we funded 50% of the project costs. Another requirement was specific to DC fast chargers. They had to have 2 different types of connectors. They had to have the combined charging system, or CCS connector, and the CHAdeMO connector. CCS is a standard that's been used for most of the North American and European manufacturers. CHAdeMO is a standard that many of the Japanese automakers developed. And at this point in time, the charger companies were making chargers with both types of connectors, so that was not a problem. The third type of DC connector is that used by Tesla, which is a proprietary design, which only Tesla vehicles can utilize. So Tesla was sort of off the table for that reason. Any station that was funded with public dollars had to be available to anybody driving an EV. And Tesla owners can buy an adapter to allow them to use one or the other types of connectors. So where were we in terms of DC fast charging in the state in the fall of 2019 when our applications were coming in? By that point, Tesla had their supercharger network extended across the I-80 corridor. Those are the yellow triangles. Those are DC fast chargers, around 100, 120 kilowatt power. And there's 2 red squares on there, which were charge point stations, 50 kilowatt power chargers in Ashland, Nebraska, and in Gretna. That's where we were at, functionally, at that point in time. However, by that time, Electrify America had put out a plan to install charging stations along the interstate. Electrify America was a subsidiary spun off by Volkswagen, again under the mandate of the court settlement. Electrify America was mandated to spend $2 billion over 10 years to help build out the highway charging network and the community charging network around the country. So the blue dots there were Electrify America stations that were released in the planning stages in the fall of 2019. Those stations have 2 150 kilowatt chargers and 2 350 kilowatt chargers. You would have been hard pressed to find an EV in 2019 that could utilize 350 kilowatts of power. A few high-end EVs. But at that point, they were building for the future. So during that 2.5 months of application period, we ended up getting 29 unique applications for 55 station locations. 40 of those involved or proposed having DC fast chargers. Altogether, the ask was $3.8 million, which was a little over twice the amount of money we had available. And at the bottom is kind of what we ended up with. 33 new public charging locations in 18 counties around the state. 20 of those are DC fast charging locations, one of which is still under construction, but is expected to be done by the end of the year. And again, $1.8 million in funding. So here's a map of the state showing the locations that we ended up funding with inset maps showing details of Omaha and Lincoln. Again, the red squares are the DC fast charging stations, and the blue circles in this case are level 2 only locations that we funded. You can see that most of the DC fast charging stations are in the eastern third of the state. That does accurately reflect the applicant pool that we had. We did prioritize highway corridors in the eastern part of the state because A, there's more people, and as a result of that, there's more traffic and we wanted to put out equipment that was going to get immediate use. But again, that's where most of the entities were that were interested in the program. OPPD was particularly active. OPD actually applied for chargers at 10 different locations, which would have required all the money we had available. So obviously we didn't give it all to OPPD, but they did end up installing chargers, DC fast charging stations in 5 locations, a couple in Omaha, Blair, North Bend, and Syracuse. We also had buy-in from several municipalities, South Sioux City and the city of Aurora. Nebraska City Utility also participated and installed a fast charger in downtown Nebraska City. MPPD also participated. We did projects with them in Norfolk and in Hebron and out in Scottsbluff, a level 2 charger at one of their offices in Scottsbluff. You can see one lonely red square out there in far west Nebraska in Potter. That was installed by High West Energy, which is an electric utility based in eastern Wyoming, whose service area extends into the Panhandle, and they have an office in Potter. So in Omaha, we ended up with 3 new DC fast charging stations. 2 of those are OPPD involvement, and then Metro Community College is the other one. In Lincoln, we worked with and elsewhere, I worked with B&R Stores, which is Super Saver and Russ's Market, Jane Raybould. So we did 2 stores in Lincoln, the Super Saver in Fallbrook, which is about a half mile from our office, and then the Russ's Market down on Highway 2 and 33rd Street, and also Russ's Market in Waverly. They're also doing stations, or have done, in Hastings and Grand Island, and the remaining one under construction is the Super Saver store at Columbus, which is getting completely rebuilt, and which resulted in having to change the location of the where the charger is going to be installed. And as I mentioned, we hope to have that one wrapped up by the end of the year. So that's what we've done, NDE has done with the Volkswagen funds. Some examples: most of the DC chargers we've installed are, first of all, ChargePoint, which has the majority of the public charging in the state. So a lot of the applicants wanted to go with a known quantity. Most of those DC chargers are 62.5 kilowatts. There are a few that are 50 kilowatts. Upper right is the station in Potter. They went with a different vendor, Zeph Energy, for their equipment. The York project is particularly interesting. We work with NPPD and Lichty Brothers Truck Stop / Huddle House on Interstate 80 and Highway 81 south of York. They installed 2 62.5 kilowatt ChargePoint chargers, which are connected. So if you're the only EV that pulls up, you're going to get the combined charge from both of those if your vehicle can accept 125 kilowatts of charge at a time. I'm going to back up a slide here. If we look at Norfolk and south through Columbus, Stromsburg, York, and Hebron, the US 81 corridor, if we extend that down to Kansas, we get to Salina, where I-35 picks up and goes on south into Texas. I-35 is one of the electric vehicle corridors that has a lot of Electrify America stations. So we've kind of extended that corridor up through most of Nebraska, so you can, in theory, get into your Chevy Bolt in Norfolk and drive to Houston and not have problems finding a charging station. So going past what NDE has done, this is a map of station locations as of about 2 weeks ago, DC fast charging stations only. We still have the same set of Tesla locations that we had to start with. There's been no new Tesla construction, and we still have the Electrify America stations. But in addition to what NDE has funded, there's a few other locations that have come up. There's DC fast charging in Kearney. There's a low power, there's a DC charger in Dannebrog that Chad Pinkelman tells me is like a 25 kilowatt charger. So it's DC, but it's not particularly fast. But MPPD has started their own initiative to try to find site hosts for DC fast charging locations in sort of the big blank areas on this map. So the green dots are locations they're working with. They've actually completed a station in Wahoo on Highway 77, which is already on there as a red box. So the MPPD initiative will help fill some of those blank spaces, but we're still left with some additional ones. And Chad just told me today that they're working with a location in Thetford, which seems like that's going to go forward. So that'll fill in another dot in the middle of the sandhills. So future needs, obviously we didn't solve all the problems with driving an EV around rural Nebraska. And also, most of these are, in present day terms, relatively low power chargers. At the time we started these projects, those were reasonable charger powers. The EVs that are coming out now can accept a charge at a much higher rate, 125, 150 kilowatts, up to maybe 250. Some of the high-end vehicles might be able to plug into a 350 kilowatt Electrify America charger and get the power at that rate. So we need more higher power chargers. Now that we have the infrastructure in a number of these locations, it's going to be less expensive to upgrade those charging sites, hopefully. We need more chargers in more locations, especially to support north-south travel and connection to the I-80 corridor. I mean, I-80 looks pretty good at this point. We need better charger reliability. Our program, as well as all the other state programs I looked at, were asking for 97% uptime, which sounds pretty good unless you're in the 3% of the time when the charger is not working. And it's one thing to have a multiple charger location, an Electrify America location, and one of the 4 chargers is down. But if you drive into one of our new charging locations and the only charger there within 100 miles is not working, you're going to have to find a level 2 or 110 and plan to spend a lot of time there. So there's room for a lot of improvement there. And another issue is sort of on the business case economic side. We want to make sure that a business or a city that basically takes the gamble, the financial risk of putting one of these stations in and operating it doesn't go broke in the process. If you're in other states where there's 1 or 2 or 3 investor-owned utilities, it's kind of easy to figure out the landscape. In Nebraska, we have dozens of smaller utilities that have their own ways of their own rate structures. So it's a little more challenging to come up with a way to assist operators to make hosting a charging station economical until we have the hopeful flood of EVs on the roads to utilize them round the clock and have the owners actually maybe make a profit on operating these stations. One other hopeful sign is the hopeful sunsetting of the Chatamo connector. If you remember, that's basically a Japanese standard, and some of the newer EVs coming out from the Japanese automakers are using CCS instead of Chatamo. So hopefully we will end up just with Tesla and CCS. Tesla actually uses the CCS standard in Europe. But we're going to be stuck with at least 2 different connector types. And Tesla's talked about opening up their network to other car owners. It's not clear to me how they're going to do that unless they're going to retrofit their chargers with a CCS connector. So stay tuned on that one. So that's it for a retrospective look at the past. Our second presenter, Curtis Nozo, could not be here today, had a health issue. I'm going to attempt to run through his slides and try to say something intelligent about them.
This is great seeing where all these chargers are going in. I'm also interested on how that impacts our local utilities. How green is that energy going to be? He mentioned some of the economic aspects of this. So how does someone make money? I mean, I've looked at this for 20 years trying to figure out how does anybody make any money at this, and there are a few companies that aren't. You look at the share values of ChargePoint, some of these others, but we have to think obviously beyond that. Where are the revenue opportunities and how reliable? Because that's the key. We were talking earlier. That's the key to the success here. Is the car manufacturers are doing their part. The cars are getting better. Technology is getting better in them. But now we need to look at the reliability of the charging network. And that's a factor of can anyone make any money at it and keep the system up to date and being upgraded and so on. So that when we go from 50 kilowatts to 350 kilowatts, 800 volts, which the new cars are going to be coming out with here in the next 5 years or so. How do we manage that? So anyway, you want to go ahead and take your sip of water, and then we'll pick it up after that. Then we'll go to Q&A because I want to get your feedback. Why are you here? What's your interest? How does this help your community? How does this help your company? And how many of you own an electric car? All right. And how many charge at home?
Everybody.
Yeah, pretty much everybody. So, all right. Thank you.
All right. So I've gone through NDE's program, which I mentioned will be ending when we finish our last DC fast charging station later this year. We will be out of the business of funding public charging, at least for the foreseeable future. The future lies with NDOT. The infrastructure bill included $5 billion appropriated to U.S. Department of Transportation to be allocated to the states using their normal highway funding formula for states to build out fast charging along federally designated EV charging corridors. Once those were completely built out to specifications, then the chargers could be placed on any highway in the state. So the money's coming to NDOT. There's also another $2.5 billion for community charging that my understanding is will be funded through a grant program operated out of USDOT itself. I haven't yet seen any plans or any timetable for when that community charging initiative would get going. So DOT came up with the acronym NEVI, which stands for National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. Nebraska's share of that is about $6 million a year for 5 years. They're planning to do, again, an 80% reimbursement. The first step in all this, before a state could get any money, they had to write a plan that needed to be submitted to DOT by August 1st of this year. So all the states were scrambling. They waited until about March to get the guidelines for what had to be in the plan. So they literally had less than 6 months to put a plan together. NDOT used 2 consultants to help put the plan together. They got that in by August 1, as did all the other states. And those have been federally approved by the end of September. Department of Energy and the USDOT came together to create a joint office of energy and transportation to administer this program. So that joint office worked with the states and put the guidance out and vetted all those plans. In Nebraska, we have 2 alternative fuel corridors specific to EV charging. The Interstate 80 corridor from border to border And the portion of Highway 6 from Omaha west to Elkhorn and then south to Gretna is another already designated EV charging corridor. The blue segments in this map show portions that have been designated as already completed. There's pretty strict criteria for this NEVI program. The charging stations that go in along highway corridors have to be basically on the order of the Electrify America stations. They have to have 4 DC fast chargers, each of which has to have at least 150 kilowatt or higher power. So these are major capital investments, need a lot of electrical infrastructure. They also have to be within, the spacing between them has to be 50 miles or less, and the stations have to be within a mile of the highway. Those are fairly challenging restrictions. The 50-mile spacing in particular is tough for western states. Wyoming, for example, said, look, we've got wide open spaces where there's nothing for 100 miles. If you don't relax these standards, we're not going to play. We don't want the money. In Nebraska, we've got one section out there where there's like 52 miles between Electrify America stations. So can we get a waiver? Is 52 miles going to be okay? Some of the stations, some of the Electrify America stations, which otherwise meet the standard for the NEVI program, are maybe 1.3 miles away from the highway. So is there going to be some reasonable latitude for existing stations that otherwise fulfill the criteria? Some states are designating additional EV charging corridors. Nebraska has chosen not to do that, which I think was a wise idea, because if you've got additional corridors you have to fill out, you can't do anything anywhere else until you finish those corridors. So personally, I don't see the benefit of doing that. Once we finish Interstate 80, then we can go play on any of the highways in the state. I think that's a good idea. I've kind of given you the overview. One thing that is not clear to me exactly how NDOT is going to approach this. Departments of Transportation are used to doing big projects and letting huge contracts. So I think in their ideal world, they'd like to find one contractor come in and finish Interstate 80 and not do what our department has done, which is deal with 30 different entities to bid individual stations. The focus to start with is on finishing the Interstate 80 corridor, which I think they hope to do within the first 2 years, and then they'll open up the rest of the state. But you'll have to stay tuned with NDOT to see how they're going to proceed. So, other questions?
This is Dave Rich with NPPD. We have 3 retail communities and 1 wholesale communities that are on that I-80 corridor that may likely get these DC fast chargers. The communities have reached out to us wanting to know how they could influence where those chargers would be located near their community. And thus far, we haven't had a response from DOT. And I know out here I'm getting this on the record.
Okay. Yeah, again, they've only had the approval of their plan since late September. So I think the things in the NDOT world, those wheels turn a little slowly. And again, nobody in NDOT knows anything about EV charging before last spring. So this is a new world to them, just as it was for us 5 or 6 years ago. While I'm here, I do want to thank Joe Francis, who's in the audience, who was my supervisor for most of this and made my life a lot easier in getting this program designed and implemented. And also thank Mark Skolnick, Dave Rich, Kirk Esty. We had lots of discussions with them both before and after launching the program.
Okay. Question?
Yeah, question and a comment, I guess, or a comment and then a question. I just, thanks to NPPD's incentive, purchased a Nissan Leaf. It has the CHAdeMO, so I just bought it. And you're saying we're going to get rid of it? So that's just a comment. Also, in my home in Cass County, Nebraska, to my destination in Clay County, Missouri, there are 3 DC fast chargers. The only one working was not the one in St. Joe, not the one in Cameron, Missouri, but the one in Nebraska City. So doubling down on the need to keep these things done.
In fact, Nebraska City Utilities for installing that one.
Did actually. And then asking about a new rate for those who own the charging stations. I think we'll take a different way of figuring out how to do rates. Utilities are so focused on their cost of service studies, they aren't thinking about their role in transforming the economy or changing the markets. And that may take work at the unicameral. I don't know. Certainly will take work in changing the utilities' way of setting rates, is my personal opinion.
Yeah, could I ask, when you ask a question, identify who you are? I mean, I know who he is, but let us know who you are, so.
My name is Rick Yoder.
Yep.
Yeah, well, in response to the question, I believe, the utilities we've talked to, they are thinking about this. They do want to encourage more EVs on the road, but they have to think about the issue is not sort of the normal per kilowatt hour charge. It's something usually called a demand charge. When somebody pulls up to that Electrify America station and gets instantaneously 350 kilowatts, the utility has to have the network capacity to suddenly provide that. And so it's those kind of overall infrastructure cost issues that utilities are thinking about when they set what are called demand charges for usually larger industrial users. But those trickle down to the EV charging world. So like most utilities are thinking about how we can fairly encourage EV charging, DC fast charging out there without burdening the rest of their ratepayers to pay the freight on that. So that's an active area of discussion in the dealings we've had with the utilities.
Okay. Mark?
Yeah, just a couple of observations as we've looked at this space grow over the last several years, that you begin to see things emerge. And there's 2 things that I would point out: battery storage and a simple outlet. Battery storage. If you combine adequate battery storage with a DC fast charger, you do not need to have the level of infrastructure required to have a megawatt of connected, as we have in Lincoln, a megawatt. We need the infrastructure to support a megawatt of connected load. Now, how does that get paid for? Who's going to pay for it? And by the way, we're in a transformer shortage. Okay, I'm just pointing out. You put battery storage, that is a solution. And that's exactly what Electrify America did, because they knew that the demand charges were a lot higher than if they put in battery storage. And that's what they have. God bless them. Okay? Battery storage. Number 2, this isn't about DC fast charging, this is about level 2. You notice the pictures you are showing of the charging stations? They look like gas pumps. Mm-hmm. They do. They're designed to look like gas pumps. Why? Why? An electric vehicle is not a conventional vehicle. How many of you today who have conventional vehicles are going to go home, pull in your garage, and fill up? Over 90% of the folks studied in our study for 3 years were charging at home. Of course they are. You know what? Most of them were plugging into a simple outlet. Why can't that simple outlet go to the public space as well? If you think about it, you don't empty your tank and fill it all the way up with a battery. You're staying typically within a 40, 50% state of charge up to maybe 80, 90%. So we could get a whole lot more plugs out there at a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a cost than buying a level 2 station, which looks like a gas pump. And we don't need the infrastructure because that type of plug does not require an enormous amount of infrastructure. They could be ubiquitous. The DC fast charge has to be reliable, and it needs to be powerful, and it needs to be fast. But for public stuff, a standard trickle charge? Why not? If you're going to be around for 3-4 hours, you're probably going to fill up how much it took you to get there. It's a paradigm shift. It's a paradigm shift. And I'm afraid the industry has conditioned us to think like it's a gas station, and it's not. It's a paradigm shift. And those are the two things that I perceive that we need to get away from, this notion that we're going to a gas pump. So.
Yep. Just as a extension of that, when I bought my Fiat 500e, the plan was originally to take advantage of OPPD's discount and put in a level 2 charger. When I had the electrician come over to the house, it turns out that my box was on the other side of the house from where the charger was going to be. It was going to cost me at least $2,000 just to run the power. And I also then had to upgrade the circuit box to make all this happen. So what did I do? I took that 110 charger, 120, whatever you want to call it, a little trickle charger, and for the last over 3 years, I have run my car off a 110 or 120 volt trickle charger. And it's done now. Caveat, I'm retired. I work from home. So does my wife. I don't obviously drive to Lincoln with my little Fiat 500e, but it works. It works, just as you said. So if we had more, just 110 volt, 15 amp plugs available, that would solve a lot of people's needs. And of course, then there's the whole question of what do we do about people that live in multifamily housing? That is a huge issue because where do those people plug in? Their landlords generally don't want to pay for that. They're temporary. They don't want to pay. The renters don't want to pay for it. So who's going to pay for it? So that's an issue we have to figure out. Is that a social cost that we bear as society in our striving to be a more resilient economy? Or do we, just let all those 40% of the population lives in multifamily housing? All those people can't drive an electric car or electric vehicle.
The market can step in, the super savers, the Hy-Vees, they've already got gas stations.
Yep.
And some of them have put in chargers for that exact market.
Yeah, I go, well, I've been to the Hy-Vee. There's supposed to be a level 2 charger at the Hy-Vee in Papillion. Haven't found it. But every time I go through Hy-Vee and check out, do you have your Super Saver card with you? I said, well, no, I drive an electric car. So when is Hy-Vee going to give me a discount when I buy groceries so I can use it to charge my electric car? So,
Bill, doesn't Hy-Vee let you charge for free?
Oh, they probably do, but they don't have there's supposed to be a charger, but nobody in Hy-Vee knows where it is. This is the Papillion Hy-Vee. So those are all issues. I think we're probably right about the ending time here. I would love to go on, and maybe next year we can have a whole longer session devoted to all of these issues. Thank you so much for coming. We are making progress. It might not come as fast as we like, but we are making progress. So thank you, everybody.